Good morning. Welcome to Inquisition Update. My name's Tom Fress, and I'll be your host for the next hour. A little rest and relaxation, a little reading, and glad to have you all here this morning, and we'll return to the book Rulers of Evil by F. Tupper Saucy, and add a little detail, a little more understanding of this ruthless, bloody beast, having to do with the time of the founding of this country, the establishment of our government. And this particular portion of the book is talking about our capital and what pagan sentiments lended idea to the specific shape of our Capitol building, and in particularity the statue that they chose to erect on the top of the dome. We were talking about a significant dogma that appeared in the Roman Catholic Church on December 8th of 1854, when the papacy made it a dogma of the Immaculate Conception of the Virgin Mary, and that she was born without original sin. It's not biblical, and when one investigates, as did F. Tupper Saucy, finds out it's purely pagan. He says this dogma was published in an encyclical named Ineffabilis Deus. It says, the doctrine which holds that the most blessed Virgin Mary, in the first instance of her conception, by a singular grace and privilege granted by Almighty God, in view of the merits of Jesus Christ, the Savior of the human race, was preserved free from all stain of original sin, as a doctrine revealed by God, and therefore to be believed firmly and constantly by all the faithful, by all Catholics. It came in a proclamation called Ineffabilis Deus. And Ineffabilis Deus mobilized the United States Congress to pass extraordinary legislation. Imagine our Congress acting to pass legislation at the proclamation of Mary's quote-unquote Immaculate Conception. It says, Congress became suddenly obsessed with expanding the Capitol's dome. According to the official publication, the Dome of the United States Capitol and Architectural History, published in 1992, quote, never before or since has an addition to the Capitol been so eagerly embraced by Congress, unquote. Within the days of Pio IX, or Pope Pius IX's definition of the doctrine of Immaculate Conception, legislation was rushed through Congress that effectively incorporated the new Vatican doctrine into the Capitol's dome. The Capitol dome's crowning architectural platform, its cupola. A week following Ineffabilis Deus, Philadelphia architect Thomas Eustrick Walter, a Freemason, completed his drawing for the proposed dome. It would be surmounted by a bronze Marian image, which would come to be recognized as, quote, the only authorized symbol of American heritage, unquote. Her classical name was Persephone, Greco-Roman goddess of the psyche, or soul, and leading deity in the Eleusinian mysteries of ancient Greece. Persephone was abducted by Saturn's son Hades and made queen consort of his dominion, the underworld. Persephone was distinguished for her immaculate conception. That's right, they have attributed to the mother of Jesus's memory a characteristic that they have derived from ancient paganism. They've attributed to Mary, the mother of Jesus, something strictly out of paganism. Now, one has to ask oneself, is this Mary that is worshipped in the Roman Catholic Church? Is it really Mary, the mother of Jesus, they worship? Or is it a pagan goddess named Persephone? Anyway, it says Persephone was distinguished for her immaculate conception, described by Proclus, head of the Platonic Academy in Athens during the 5th century of the Christian era, as, quote, her undefiled transcendency in her generations, unquote. In fact, most of the statues of Persephone in the Christianized Roman Empire, in other words, the baptized pagan Roman Empire, had been simply re-identified and reconsecrated as the Virgin Mary by missionary adaptation. Over and over and over again, when we study the roots of what is known today as Catholicism, we find repeatedly that it's just, all of its icon, virtually everything about it, is just baptized paganism. Just, Rome didn't change much. It just changed the placards and in the inscriptions on all of its previously existing pagan temples and pagan statues. Is God worshipped by this abomination? No, God is not worshipped by this abomination. And it's not Christianity. It's Catholicism. Never should the two be compared as being related. And that's a concept that came hard for me to finally get through my head. Catholicism is not Christianity. It's baptized paganism. It says Congress appropriated $3,000 for a statue of Persephone. President Franklin Pierce, Secretary of War Jefferson Davis, awarded the commission to a famous young American sculptor named Thomas Crawford. Crawford lived and worked in Rome. His reputation had been established with a statue of Orpheus, which, when exhibited in Boston in 1843, was the first sculptured male nude to be seen in the United States. Since another of Persephone's ancient names was Libera, or Liberty, Crawford named his Persephone Freedom. His work has worn this title ever since. They call her Liberty. That pagan idol that stands the top of our seat of government is called freedom. I wonder, freedom for whom? It says, after 2 years of labor in the shadow of the Jesu, that is the Church of Jesu in Rome, the headquarters of the Jesuit order, Crawford completed a plaster model of freedom. Her right hand rested on a sword pointing downward. Her left hand, against which leaned the shield of the United States, held a laurel wreath. She was crowned with an eagle's head and feathers mounted on a tiara of pentagrams, some inverted, some not. When ultimately cast in bronze, freedom would reach the height of 19 feet 6 inches, a sum perhaps deliberately calculated to pay homage to the work's final destination, the Beast of Revelation at lot 666. For 19 feet 6 inches works out to 6 plus 6 plus 6 feet and 6 plus 6 plus 6 inches. Freedom would stand upon a 12-foot iron pedestal also designed by Thomas Crawford. The upper part of the pedestal was a globe ringed with the motto of the Bacchic Gospel, E Pluribus Unum, while the lower part was flanked with 12 wreaths, the 12 Caesars, and as many fasces, those bundle of rods wrapped around axe blades, symbolizing Roman totalitarianism. Crawford wanted his sculpture to be cast at the Royal Bavarian Foundry in Munich, where Rudolph Rogers' great 10-ton bronze doors leading to the Capitol Rotunda were cast, while architect Thomas U. Walter preferred Clark Mills Foundry near Washington. Their transatlantic argument ended abruptly when Crawford died in London on September 10, 1857, of a tumor behind his left eye. In that same year, 1857, the United States Supreme Court handed down the Dred Scott versus Stanford, a decision which most historians agree ignited the great American Civil War. The opinion was written by the Roger Brooke Taney, who succeeded John Marshall as Chief Justice. A devout Roman Catholic under the influence of the Jesuits most of his long life, according to Dr. Walsh's American Jesuits, Taney held that Negro slaves and their descendants could never be state citizens and thus could never have standing in court to sue or be sued. Nor could they ever hope to be United States citizens, since the Constitution did not create such a thing as United States citizenship. Taney's opinion was widely suspected of being part of a plot to prepare the way for a second Supreme Court decision that would prohibit any state from abolishing slavery. American slavery would become a permanent institution. This is exactly what happened, although not quite as everyone supposed it would. First, slavery was abolished by the 13th Amendment in 1865. Then, the 14th Amendment of 1868 created a new national citizenship. A new national citizenship. Unlike state citizenship, which was denied to Negroes, national citizenship was available to anyone as long as they subjected themselves to the jurisdiction of the United States. That is, to the federal government, whose seat is the District of Columbia, Rome. What is so remarkably Jesuitic about the scheme that proceeded out of Roger Taney's opinion is that slavery was sustained by the very amendment that supposedly abolished it. Amendment 13 provides for the abolition of involuntary servitude, except as punishment for crime whereby the party shall have been duly convicted, unquote. In our time, the federally regulated communications media, with their continually exciting celebration of violence and drug use, have subtly but vigorously induced youthful audiences to play on a minefield of complementary criminal statutes. The fruit of this collaboration is a burgeoning national prison population of men and women enslaved constitutionally. American slavery has become a permanent institution. Reaction to Taney's decision animated Abraham Lincoln to immerse himself in abolitionist rhetoric and challenge Stephen A. Douglas for the Senate in 1858. Meanwhile, in Rome, freedom's plaster matrix was packed into 5 huge crates and crammed with bales of rags and cases of lemons into the hold of a tired old ship bound for New York, the Emily Taylor. Early on, the Emily sprang a leak and had to be put into Gibraltar for repairs. Once the voyage was resumed, stormy weather caused new leaks. Despite attempts to lighten her load by jettisoning the rags and the citron, the lemons. Things got so bad she put into Bermuda on July 27th of 1858. The crates were placed in storage, and the Emily was condemned and sold. In November, Lincoln lost his bid for Douglas Seaton in the Senate, and in December, another ship, the G.W. Norton, arrived in New York Harbor from Bermuda with some of the statuary crates. By March 30th, 1859, all 5 crates had been delivered to the foundry at Clark Mills on Bradensburg Road on the outskirts of the District of Columbia, where the process of casting the Immaculate Virgin into bronze and iron was begun. Lincoln opposed Stephen Douglas again in 1860, this time for the presidency, and this time victoriously. The northern states rejoiced. The southern states, fearing Lincoln would abolish slavery, prepared to secede. Quote, "The tea has been thrown overboard," unquote, shouted the Mercury of Charleston, South Carolina, capital of American Scottish Freemasonry. Quote, "The revolution of 1860 has been initiated," unquote. By Lincoln's inauguration in March of 1861, 6 states had seceded from the Union. In April, General Pierre Beauregard, a Roman Catholic who resigned his superintendency of West Point to join the Confederacy, fired on the United States military enclave at Fort Sumter, and brotherly blood began flowing. Jefferson Davis, who 5 years earlier had commissioned Crawford to sculpt the Immaculate Virgin, served as president of the rebellious Confederate States of America. In historian Eli N. Evans' book on Confederate cabinet member Judah P. Benjamin, I happened upon a strange and interesting link between Davis and the Vatican. While a young Protestant student at the Roman Catholic monastery at St. Thomas College in Bardstown, Davis had pled to be received into the Roman Catholic faith, but was not permitted to convert. He remained a hazy Protestant until his confirmation into the Episcopal Church at the age of 50. Despite outward appearances of rejection, the Confederate president maintained a vibrant communion with Rome. No one was more aware of this than Abraham Lincoln. In an interview in the White House during August of 1861, Lincoln confided the following to a former law client of his, the Roman Catholic priest named Charles Chinnicky, who published the president's words in his own autobiography, 50 Years in the Church of Rome. Quote, "I feel more and more every day," states the president, "that it's not against the Americans of the South alone that I am fighting. It is more against the Pope of Rome, his Jesuits, and their slaves. Very few Southern leaders are not under the influence of the Jesuits through their wives, family relations, and their friends. Several members of the family of Jeff Davis belong to the Church of Rome. Even the Protestant ministers are under the influence of the Jesuits without suspecting it. To keep ascendancy in the north, as she does in the south, Rome is doing here what she did in Mexico and in all of South American republics. She's paralyzing by civil war the arms of the soldiers of liberty. She divides our nation in order to weaken, subdue, and rule it. Neither Jeff Davis nor any one of the Confederacy would have dared to attack the North had they not relied on the promises of the Jesuits, that under the mask of democracy, the money and arms of the Roman Catholic Church and even the arms of France were at their disposal if they would attack us. I pity the priests and bishops and monks of Rome and the United States when the people realize that they are in great part responsible for the tears and the blood shed in this war. I conceal what I know, for if the people knew the whole truth, this war would turn into a religious war at once." We'll be back right after the messages. You're listening to Inquisition Update on First Amendment Radio.
book of Revelation says, the spirit of prophecy is the testimony of Jesus Christ. This is at the very heart of FirstAmendmentRadio.com. In that spirit, we have created the Prophecy Reality News app for all of your mobile devices, streaming First Amendment Radio 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Available for your Apple, Android device, and smartphone, absolutely free. Get the Prophecy Reality News app installed today, so you can listen to First Amendment Radio wherever you are. The Prophecy Reality News app. Get it now.
The program you are listening to is 100% sponsored by you, the listener, on this First Amendment Rights Media channel. You will notice that there are few commercials on this radio network. There's a good reason for that. Corporate advertising dollars come with strings that limit program content. So without your help, these programs cannot continue on internet or our several affiliates. If you benefit by the educational law programs, we ask you to give. If you are admonished or nurtured by the Bible and ministry programs, we ask you to give. If some voice a cause that you are passionate about, we ask you to give. If you believe in any of these, we ask you to support them as you would a missionary on a continual basis, as if giving a tithe for missionary radio. These programs are not commercially viable and must be supported by those faithful to the cause of truth. Look for the button to sponsor your favorite programs at our listen and schedule pages on the internet. Then, when you subscribe, we will send you the last quarterly MP3 CD of that program immediately, and continue to do so with each new quarter. We will also give you unlimited archive access to all of our programs. We're asking you to give much less than a tithe, so that you may also send support directly to a particular program host, cause, and anywhere else the Spirit may lead you. Do all to the glory of our God and Creator, for His holy nation, the only kingdom that will last forever. Thank you for listening. Since the beginning of time, kings have sought it, nations have fought for it. It has been traded, it has been borrowed, it has been purchased, it has been stolen. There's a reason for it. To secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and to our posterity. Invest with the security of gold and silver. Call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188 or visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net. Listen to Financial Survival with your host Melody Cedarstrom right here on FirstAmendmentRadio.com at 4 p.m. Eastern or 1 p.m. Pacific Time. Visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net or call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188. Toll free 1-800-375-4188.
Welcome back to the second half hour of Inquisition Update. My name's Tom Fresh, your host. I didn't quite make it through this final quote of Abraham Lincoln prior to the break, and we'll continue with that. Now we'll continue with the last portion of this quote by Abraham Lincoln, who had figured out that it was the Jesuits who had fomented the American Civil War. And as we know, the Jesuits, as is stated in their oath, foment wars, manipulate by controlling both sides of the conflict secretly, and then manipulating the outcome, and then are seated at the armistice table to determine the outcome. That Hegelian dialectic little by little, Rome achieves her diabolical ends by fomentation of war, controlling the war, setting the terms of the armistice, getting just one jot or one tittle closer to its ultimate goal of world domination, and then continuing this Hegelian process over time, hundreds and thousands of years. And the last portion of this quote is very significant. Listen to what he said. He said, "I conceal what I know, for if the people knew the whole truth, this war would turn into a religious war, and at once take a tenfold more savage and bloody character." Abraham Lincoln thought it wise at that time to hide the fact that Rome was the motivating and instigating factor in the Civil War. But I question the wisdom of keeping that a secret any longer. Anyway, I'll continue with the book. It says, the Great Civil War rampaged for another year. In autumn of 1862, the Confederacy's invasion of the Union was defeated at the Battle of Antietam in Sharpsburg, Maryland. As if in celebration, the Immaculate Virgin was moved from the foundry and brought to the grounds of the Capitol construction site. The lower floors of the building were teeming with the traffic of Union barracks and makeshift hospital. Above all this loomed Thomas U. Walter's majestic cast-iron dome, patterned after that of St. Isaac's Cathedral in St. Petersburg, Russia. So says this author. Looks more like St. Peter's Cathedral in the Vatican. Anyway, he says in March of 1863, freedom, this Marianic image of pagan origin, I'm just adding, was mounted on a temporary pedestal, quote, in order that the public may have an opportunity to examine it before it is raised to its destined position, unquote, as stated in the Walters Annual Report dated November 1st, 1862. One would expect photographers to be climbing all over themselves to make portraits of, quote, the only authorized symbol of American heritage, unquote, while she was available for ground-level examination. America's pioneer photographer, Matthew Brady, had shot a comprehensive record of the Capitol under construction, including portraits of both Capitol architect Thomas U. Walter and Commissioner of Public Buildings Benjamin B. French. But neither Brady nor anyone else photographed freedom while she was available for close-ups. Why? Was there a fear that perhaps some Protestant theologian might raise a hue and cry about the pagan icon about to dominate the Capitol building? Apparently not too many Protestants ever examined freedom at ground level. The District of Columbia was still virtually a Roman Catholic enclave. Moreover, the nation in 1863 had been drastically reduced in size. The concession of the southern states had left only 22 northern states, and these 22 were heavily populated by Catholic immigrants from Europe and Ireland. So incredibly large, we recall from Sidney E. Alstrom's Religious History of the American People, was the flow of immigrants that by 1850, Roman Catholics, once a tiny and ignored minority, had become the country's largest religious communion, unquote. Thus, Crawford's towering goddess was being examined mostly by Roman Catholic eyes that could not help but see in her the dreadnought Mary described by Pope Pius IX in Ubi Primum, quote, ever lovable and full of grace, set up between Christ and his church, always delivering the Christian people from their greatest calamities and assaults of all their enemies, ever rescuing them from ruin, unquote. The war rapidly advanced to conclusion while freedom held forth on the east grounds of the capital. The Union forces under Burnside lost to Lee at Fredericksburg, but Rosecrans defeated the Confederates at Murfreesboro, and Grant took Vicksburg. In summer, Lee's second attempt to invade the North failed at Chancellorsville and Gettysburg. By fall, Grant won the Battle of Chattanooga and the Missionary Ridge with Sherman and Thomas. By the end of November of 1863, the Union had taken Knoxville, and the Confederacy found its resources exhausted and its cause hopelessly lost. On November 24th, a steam-operated hoisting apparatus lifted Immaculate Virgin Mother of God's first section to the top of the Capitol Dome and secured it. The second section followed the next day. 3 days later, in a driving thunderstorm, the third section was secured. The fourth section was installed on November 31st. At noon, December 2nd of 1863, before an enormous crowd, the Immaculate Virgin's fifth and final section was put into place. The ritual procedure for her installation is preserved in Special Order Number 248 of the War Department. Her head and shoulders rose from the ground. The 300-foot trip took 20 minutes. At the moment the fifth section was affixed, a flag unfurled above it. The unfurling was accompanied by a national salute of 47 gunshots fired into the Washington atmosphere. 35 shots issued from a field battery on Capitol Hill. 12 were discharged from the forts surrounding the city. Reporting the event in the December 10th issue of the New York Tribune, an anonymous journalist echoed the qualities that Pope Pius IX had given Mary. Quote, "During more than 2 years of our struggle, while the national cause seemed weak, she has patiently waited and watched below. Now that victory crowns our advances, and the conspirators are being hedged in and vanquished everywhere, and the bonds are being freed, she comes forward. The cynosure of thousands of eyes, her face turned rebukingly toward Virginia, and her hand outstretched as if in guarantee of national unity and personal freedom," unquote. If Tribune readers felt more nationally united and personally free because freedom was glaring at rebellious Virginia and outstretching her hand to her beloved America, they were deceived. For the goddess faced in precisely the opposite direction. She faced east, as she does to this day, faced east across Maryland, the land of Mary, across the Atlantic, toward her beloved Rome. In fact, neither hand outstretches in any direction. Both are at rest, one on her sword and the other holding the laurel wreath. And her 47 Jupiterian thunderbolt gunshots, they were a tribute to the Jesuit bishop who had placed the District of Columbia under her protection. For December 2nd, 1863, told the 47th year from John Carroll's last full day alive, December 2nd, 1815. So they hailed John Carroll with the volley and the sound of guns when this Marian icon was finally situated on top of the dome. They didn't tell me all this in my history books at school. It says, once the pressures of the installation were over, an exhausted but relieved Capitol architect Thomas U. Walter wrote his wife Amanda at their Philadelphia home to say that, quote, Her ladyship looks placid and beautiful, much better than I expected, and I have had thousands of congratulations on this great event, and a general regret was expressed that you were prevented from witnessing this triumph," unquote. Someone else had missed the triumph, too. Someone who, by all the rules of protocol, should have been there no matter what. The Commander-in-Chief of the United States Armed Forces, whose War Department had engineered the whole Capitol project from top to bottom, President Abraham Lincoln. At noon on the day the Temple of federal legislation was placed under the patronage of Persephone, Freedom, wife of Hades, Queen of the Dead, Immaculate Virgin of Rome, Protectress of the Jesuits, Protectress of Maryland, and Patroness of the United States. The record shows that Lincoln sequestered himself inside the White House, touched with a quote-unquote fever, a telling detail. But the sacred iconography was still not complete. The engineers began now preparing the interior of the dome, its canopy, for a massive painting Congress had approved back in the spring of 1863. This painting would depict George Washington undergoing the secular version of the canonization of Ignatius Loyola. It contains even more data useful to our understanding of the character and provenance of American government. We examine this masterpiece in our next chapter. The next page of the book gives an upward view of the fresco painted on the interior of the dome at the pagan temple in Washington, D.C., called the Capitol Building. And we'll read about it here in Chapter 23 of the book, The Dome of the Great Sky. Begins with a quote. It says, "It's like St. Peter's." This quote from tourists describing the Rotunda fresco as quoted in the official Capitol guidebook, We the People. It's like St. Peter's. He says, Archbishop John Hughes of New York sailed from Rome in the autumn of 1851, just after Congress had approved funds to enlarge the Capitol. Hughes had laid the cornerstone for St. Patrick's Cathedral in Manhattan and had helped the Jesuits establish Fordham University in Westchester. Now he was helping them decorate the Capitol's interior. In Rome, Superior General John Ruthan introduced the Archbishop to Constantino Brumidi, an artist boasting an impressive list of credits. Brumidi had painted an acclaimed portrait of Pio IX, that is Pope Pius IX, which the Vatican still exhibits, an Immaculate Conception in the little sanctuary of the Madonna del Archetto in Via San Marcello, and the restoration of 3 16th-century frescoes in the Vatican Palace. Brumidi was good. General Ruthan had determined to make him America's Michelangelo. Archbishop Hughes let it be known that Brumidi would be welcome to paint some frescoes in churches of the New York bishopric. And he says, General Ruthan then went about making the Vatican's artist acceptable to the American egalitarianism. Soon after the Archbishop left Rome for New York, the Vatican accused Constantine Brumidi of criminal acts. Supposedly, Brumidi had committed crimes during his membership in the Republican Civil Guard under Giuseppe Mazzini, the Italian Freemason who had recently led ill-fated nationalist revolutions against the papacy. These crimes were said to have included A, refusing to fire on his Republican friends, B, looting several convents, and C, participating in a plot to destroy the Catholic Church, acts reasonably sure to merit a hero's welcome in Protestant America. The architect of the Capitol's unpublished dossier on Brumidi, which I was permitted to examine during 1993, notes that several widely divergent accounts suggest that Constantino Brumidi himself was probably the source of at least some of the legends, unquote. Vatican justice found the artist guilty in December of 1851 and sentenced him to 18 years in prison. Several weeks later, the sentence was reduced to 6 years, and within 2 months, on March 20, Pio IX, Pope Pius IX, himself quietly granted Brumidi an unconditional pardon. General Ruth Ann then placed his newly created Republican freedom fighter on a ship bound for America. I'll just add, certainly the American Protestant people could not know that he was a loyal Roman Catholic. It said Brumidi arrived in New York Harbor on September 18th. On November 29th, he filed for state citizenship of New York Court of Common Pleas. Although the invitee had come to paint New York churches, there was no such work to be done there. Instead, the Archbishop sent him to Mexico City by way of Washington, D.C. In Washington, Brumidi was received by his Masonic brother, Thomas Ulrich Walter. Yes, the designer of the Capitol was a Freemason. Freemasonry and Jesuitism. The connections are just staggering. It says, for 2 years, Walter had been serving President Millard Fillmore as architect of the Capitol. When the cornerstone of Walter's Capitol expansion plan was laid on the 4th of July of 1851, President Fillmore and Commissioner of Public Buildings Benjamin B. French, who also happened to be Grand Master of the Masonic fraternity, led a colorful ceremony. Washington's popular national intelligencer reported the occasion was, quote, welcomed by a display of national flags and the ringing of bells from the various churches and engine houses, unquote. Thomas Walter needed Constantino Brumidi, an edifice as important as the United States Capitol, like the palaces of Augustus and Nero, the baths of Titus and Livia, the loggia of Raphael at the Vatican, required the most noble and permanent interior decorations possible. Only fresco painting, in which pigments are mixed with wet mortar immediately before application to the surface, would suffice. And only Constantino Brumidi, of all the artists living in America, knew how to paint fresco. But the dome was not yet ready to be frescoed, so the artist was routed to the sunny Italian climate of Mexico City to enjoy life, to ponder his subject matter at a casual pace, to wait for the call. 2 years later, on December 28, 1854, less than 3 weeks following Pope Pius IX's decree of the doctrine of Immaculate Conception, Constantino Brumidi appeared at the office of Montgomery C. Meigs, supervising engineer and Capitol Extension Project. The Capitol's unpublished dossier on Brumidi relates that as the two men conversed in broken French, Brumidi struck Meigs as, quote, a lively old man with a very red nose, either from Mexican suns or French brandies, unquote. The immediate upshot of their conversation was a commission to paint a fresco covering an elliptical arch at the end of Meigs' office at the Capitol. It was the first fresco ever painted in the United States, as well as Brumidi's first in 5 years. The fresco celebrated the coming Civil War in terms of Roman history. According to the Commission's report, it depicted, quote, a senator who points to Rome and appeals to Cincinnatus to come to the help of his country, unquote. Cincinnatus, a 5th century BC Roman dictator, was called to defend Rome twice, first from foreign invaders and then from his own common people. Likewise, American heroes first defended their Rome against foreign British invaders and were now about to be called to defend the same Rome against her own seceding states. Brumidi completed the Cincinnatus in March of 1855. Meigs invited various congressmen to behold it. They were impressed. Thomas U. Walter was much delighted. On March 20th, Jefferson Davis approved of the Cincinnatus and authorized Meigs to negotiate a salaried contract with Brumidi. Constantino Brumidi's lifetime career spent decorating the Capitol began on a salary of $8 a day. His contract allowed him to accept other artistic projects, but not to leave Washington. In November of 1855, he began a canvas painting of the Blessed Virgin for St. Ignatius Jesuit Church in Baltimore, but was not present for its December 4th installation on the occasion of the Feast of the Immaculate Conception. In the summer of 1862, even as Thomas Crawford's statue was being cast at the Mills Foundry, Thomas U. Walter wrote to Brumidi asking him to paint something monumental in real fresco to cover the 4,664 square foot inner surface of the Capitol's dome. 3 weeks later, Brumidi submitted sketches of something he entitled Apotheosis of Washington. The word apotheosis was then commonly understood by its definition in Webster's 1829 dictionary. Apotheosis, the act of placing a prince or other distinguished person among the heathen deities. This honor was often bestowed on illustrious men of Rome, and followed by the erection of temples and the institution of sacrifices to the new deity. Walter responded ecstatically to the apotheosis, writing the artist that, quote, no picture in the world will at all compare with this in magnitude. He raised the design before Worshipful Master and Commissioner of Buildings Benjamin French as possibly the grandest and the most imposing that has ever been executed in the world. French enthusiastically agreed, added that the Secretary of the Interior was also greatly impressed. Final approval of the apotheosis price, $40,000, came in March 11, 1863, just as the Immaculate Virgin was being placed. We'll continue tomorrow on Inquisition Update.
Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.
I know you all want answers, and believe me, so do I, and I'll do my best to get them.
Despite Nicolas Cage's promise to do his best to get left behind rapture answers for us, don't hold your breath. Not everyone believes Left Behind is true prophecy. Some may even regard as conspiratorial the mainstream re-release of the Left Behind movie with actor Nicolas Cage portraying the main character as an attempt to further reinforce in the minds of all this perception of false prophecy in order to condition the masses for the play about to begin. If you want true Bible prophecy answers, get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. The author exposes the Latin rapture origin, the 7-year tribulation deception, true Bible revelation of Daniel's 70 weeks, the abomination of desolation, the Restrainer, America in the Revelation, the image of the beast and the mark of the beast, and the truth about God's chosen people, and so much more about Bible prophecy. This book will shatter the left-behind paradigm of future events. Get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.